Hello. If you are interested in the history of Games Workshop, there's a very good chance that you'll already be familiar with the name Marc Gascoigne. He has been an instrumental figure in the history of GW, working on board games, role-playing games, helping to create the Black Library and manage and maintain it, being an editor for Fighting Fantasy, and so much more besides. I have interviewed Marc a couple of times, but he joined me again to talk about some of his work on Games Workshop's board games, and some of the games that never made it to release. There are some incredible stories from Marc's awesome career, and we talked about things like Chainsaw Warrior, Fury of Dracula, and an unreleased game about Frankenstein. It was a terrific conversation, and I'm very glad to bring it to you. I am Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with former Games Workshop designer, author, fiction editor, and all sorts really, Marc Gascoigne. We were going to talk a bit about Chainsaw Warrior and some of the works with Stephen Hand at Games Workshop and the sort of creation of some of those board games.
GW board games, the real golden age in some ways.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, lots of really interesting games came out during that period. But I mean, what was your sort of first interaction with Stephen Hand?
Well, I as well as doing Judge Dredd roleplay in the London days, we're talking here pre the move to Nottingham, so 85 into 86, as well as doing the Dredd RPG and helping with White Dwarf and assisting the guys who had acquired Warlock at a very short notice from Puffin Books. And Stephen Ian decided, oh no, we'll do this in-house as well. I was assisting Albie Fury, who was the head of game design and production and all-round genius. He'd been editor of Games and Puzzles, and he'd brought in Talisman, particularly for Workshop. But that whole range of early board games, Warlock and Doctor Who and Andrew Lloyd Webber's Calamity, aptly named. And I was assisting him with the new range of stuff, and he was working on Railway Rivals and a bunch of other things. Golden Heroes was coming together on the RPG side. And we would get game designs just turn up in the post. And some of them we commissioned, some of them we had a good run with and decided not to. Some of them came out, some of them didn't. But in the mail one day was a little deck of cards. And it was a game based on the Five Doctors episode of Doctor Who, The Tomb of Rassilon, which had aired about 6 months earlier by a young man called Steve Hand. And it was a card game with hidden elements shuffled into sections of the deck. A competitive game where you're trying to get through this environment that was represented on the cards with twists and turns and traps, and different doctors had different powers, and there were enemies and allies, companions and Daleks and various things hidden in it, again, that you shuffled into the deck at various stages. And the trick was to get to the end and find the tomb before anybody else did and before the cards ran out. And I really rather like this. I played this. We used to just play test either in the office, or there was actually one of London's very first game cafes. It's called the Pink Hippopotamus Club down near Old Street, which is just a pub, but put these things on. And they had loads of board games, including some weird ones. And we used to pile in there on a Wednesday night and just take experimental games and try and play test them with strangers. And if not, ourselves, which is more likely because the place was always empty because it was a games club at a time when it wasn't ready for it. Yeah, we're talking again, 85. And we play tested this thing a few times. I thought it was really good. And then the big job is persuading management that this is what we want to do. They'd been quite bitten by the Doctor Who license, which was quite expensive when they did the Who game. And it had done solidly, but no better than GW's own creations. And Warlock and Battle Cars and so on had sold at least as well. And Talisman was, even in its first edition with the Gary Chalk art, was still doing great guns and was talking about expansions even at that early stage. So in the end, they decided not to. But not before I'd moved up to Nottingham, which is spring of 86. And so we showed it round there too. And I did a bunch of things there and a bit of a jack of all trades. I was commissioning editor for games, but as board games and so on grew and expanded, and they then decided, well, Blood Bowl had worked really well. I worked with that with Jervis on that, and he got promoted to effectively board game manager for a bit. And Steve was definitely one of those talents that we were still nurturing. And one day, Jervis or myself, we can't remember, he claims it's him, of course, but a close personal friend, that Steve sent in another thing, which wasn't, I don't think was called anything, but was about a warrior fighting folks underneath a skyscraper that had been taken over, or within a skyscraper, and then down into the dungeons. And that seemed to really strike a chord. A solo game was very unusual at the time. But game books were definitely a thing. Firetop Mountain had come out in '82, and Steve and Ian were doing loads of stuff. I'd written the Out of the Pit book by then, though not yet the Titan World book. And they were still, it was worth exploring, and it became a thing. Meanwhile, everyone was laughing about the fact that in Rogue Trader there were characters with chainsaws. And the models with chainsaws, all give them a chainsaw, and they became chainswords and so on and so forth in 40k. But give them a chainsaw, give them a chainsaw. And it seemed to vibe with the time. There was a much banned film called Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, which is seen as a video nasty. I never saw the film. I did have the T-shirt, which attracted a lot of attention in nightclubs. And it was part of the zeitgeist. Characters running around with chainsaws, and then Evil Dead and so on and so forth, alluding to similar things. And it became a thing, and it became commissioned. But also, it was pretty much fully formed when it came in.
Right.
Steve's an interesting character. He's had a long career in video game design and management. He's still working away, though he's run his own company for quite a while. But he's quite a prickly fellow. He likes to do things his way. And speaking as someone who can be exactly like that myself, I want things done a certain way. I can understand that, and we've usually got on over the years. But the other thing about him is he's a great game designer, and he had made a lot of decisions, rejected a lot of things that meant that this thing worked pretty much out of the box. So you could lay it out in front of Brian Ansell and he'd have a go and he'd go, yeah, I get this. Yeah. And as Jervis found with Blood Bowl, it's then, right, well, you do this, sort this out, get this out. Having been inspired by the success of Blood Bowl, where really what I did was I packaged the game. Obviously, I added or took out Jervis's commas and semicolons and so on, but his game system was very solid and a lot of playtesting and years of thought had gone into it. So I added the jokes. That's what I always say. I just did the jokes and the did you knows and created Jim and Bob and looked at the packaging influences. And it was the same for this, really. So I produced it. The game didn't need much work. And the card mix, he'd spent a lot of time getting that right, which in a solo game has to be right. If it just kills you every time. We also didn't want people to play it and win easily and go, well, just spent 18 quid on that piece of crap. We've been working with Brett on a couple of Dread things, I think. Brett Ewan's the artist who ended up doing the cover, and he was all over this. He does very tough guy stuff. Not quite as big boots as Cam Kennedy with the 14-foot wide Dread boots, but very crunchy, big knuckles on everything. And when you meet Brett, he's a short, squat guy with a flat top haircut, and very much similar. So there's a bit of himself on the cover of Chainsaw Warrior, I think.
Right.
And the ideas just came. The artwork came together very quickly. The rules, had this setting. Okay, you've got 24 hours to save the city you're going in with a chainsaw kind of stuff. And I don't know where the comic book idea came from, but just introducing the background with this little booklet that told you everything you need to know about who this guy is and where he came from. And of course, it felt, well, you might as well write it then, and off we go. Which was, I don't know, I was 22. I could do this, can't I? So scripted a comic book drawn by Brett Ewan. So it was very complimentary. He cut out most of my verbiage, of course, quite rightly. So between us, we did that. I have to say that I think the most notable thing about that comic book, it's one of the things people remember about it, isn't it? So it stands out. It's like, oh, it was a solo game. Yeah, but it came with this comic book thing. And we hadn't really done comic book stuff at that time. But that's where Brett came from. Of course, he was drawing Caleb Dark in the Citadel Journal, which was pre the join up. So actually, the connection would have come through Brian and crew there as a ongoing 2000 AD artist. But yes, Caleb Dark, of course. And the back page of it, of course, is a photocopy of a classic Charles Atlas advert. Sand kicked in the face, wimp becomes hero. Flogging they decided to make some miniatures and a T-shirt and so on and so forth for it. And I don't know if the T-shirt was inspired by folks wearing Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers T-shirts or what. There were a few knocking about. I have a feeling someone in Nottingham was making bootlegs rather than official merch, but it was quite striking anyway. And in fact, actually, I remember it. It was the film. You weren't allowed to say chainsaw on it, so it was Hollywood Chainsaw Silhouette Hookers. That was the logo of this film.
Okay.
Okay. So we knew we were onto something with these chainsaws, plainly. Whoever was championing them, whether it was Brian or what. But yeah, so it came out and it did tolerably well, I think. It was an unusual thing. But at the time, the new edition of Talisman in the bookshelf box was out and doing well, and the expansions for that started. All the RPGs were coming in similar sized boxes, so it fit in with the range.
Yeah.
And we did talk pretty much immediately about a sequel. So the first one, I think, I think I probably last played it, a couple of weeks before we finished the rule book, but I don't think I've played it since. But there's still a copy in the archive. But I think the first one is in a skyscraper, isn't it?
Yeah.
Going into the building and so on and so forth. The next one, Steve did want to go down into the sewers,
right?
Where it turns out it's not just a strange infestation, but there is a hole into hell or some other dimension,
right?
And he wanted to push on the mad scientists and tampering with nature, possibly mad Nazi scientists left over from the war.
Right.
It was only some years later that Steve and I confidently said, "Did we invent Doom before Doom happened?" And you have to point out not really, because Wolfenstein had already been out, and some of the team then went to ID to make Doom. There's a fascinating book on the whole history of how Doom came about. It's worth reading. It came out about 15 years ago, but that's an aside. You can put that in your show notes. But of course, one of the guys who worked on Doom was Sandy Peterson, the Call of Cthulhu author.
Right. Yes.
Who, for a time around then, spent 3-4 months working at Workshop on a kind of lend-lease kind of scheme.
Right.
I don't know who we sent to Chaosium, but he did work in the studio, as folks like Ken Rolston, Matt Forback did some years later.
So would this be when the Call of Cthulhu was being reprinted?
Yes, it was, and and Workshop had the Chaosium license for Europe.
Sure,
and was doing Stormbringer and various other things. RuneQuest, of course, albeit that had gone to Avalon Hill for their medievalized edition, so on and so forth. So yes, there was quite a lot of that going on. There were a few folks of various types, artists and designers and so on, and business folks who'd come in on a secondment. And Sandy, lovely fella. Steve was always convinced that maybe Sandy took quite a bit from Chainsaw Warrior into Doom.
Right.
But you don't know, do you? And everything inspires everything, as we know. But so he came up with this second idea, and I don't know how far he got with it, but certainly we spent a lot of time over lunch, over the lunchtime pint and the shepherd's pie in the Bell Inn. There ought to be a plaque, really, because we wore those seats down. Positing what it could be and sniggering to ourselves. And in the end, it was decided that it wasn't going ahead. But meanwhile, could Steve work on some other things? So fairly soon after that came Fury of Dracula.
Of course.
And that was for Jervis. And it obviously has some precedent in Scotland Yard, the classic Ravensburger game where one person's on the run and pops up every so often and everyone else is the detective trying to chase them, and you have to use different means of transport to try and catch up and pinpoint where they were last seen and then nab them. But the level of storytelling that he added to it, it's Dracula. Steve himself very much into that, fan of the classic horror stories. And yeah, a big fan of a lot of things, but very much into his Bram Stoker, and created a game that's still in print. And there's
Mm.
a new edition a couple of years back, as I understand it. And at some point, I think I left in April '87, and Fear of Dracula came out around then or just after. And then he was offered a post, I think, because he worked on Chaos Marauders,
Right.
which was yeah, the warring tribes of the orcs stomping along, nabbing things from each other, which again owes its origins
Sure.
in a game originally called Ogallala, which is a German game, but published out here as the Awesome Blackfeet game, or Blackfeet, by
Mm.
Waddington's, later redone as a Starship game called Starships or
Right.
Spaceships. Um, Absolutely brilliant games that were, if you've got a collection of 70s board games, Blackfeet should definitely be in there. One of Stephen Ian's favorite games. Yeah, they're
Right.
casual board game players. And when this thing turned up as the inspiration, but a whole new game with extra skills and powers and a lot of the very specific, Chaos Warband and Orc Warband features.
Mm.
A hidden classic, actually. We
Yeah.
got a copy out at the GW Open Day in Manchester last year, and everyone was
Mm.
very keen to play that one. It's a shame that one's never really re-emerged. But
Sure. They did do a Fantasy Flight reissue of it during that
did they?
period.
Excellent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where because the Fantasy Flight did the first revival of Fury of Dracula as
Oh,
well,
so yeah.
and Steve was involved in those. It's not always the case.
Right.
Steve's always been very clear about who owns what,
Mm.
and yeah, pay the designer, which I think is very laudable. Yeah, we've all done stuff where it's, oh, that was your day job, so we own it.
Mm.
But they managed to do a deal on that one way or another. And if you get brought in to work on your own second or third edition and there's more money there,
Sure.
then that can smooth the way. I've done deals with other folks like that. But that was, I think, for a brief period, he was Mr. Game Design at Workshop and kept coming up with these great mechanics.
Mm.
I'm sure he was assisting on other stuff that escapes me. So, and there were quite a few games started to come out at the time, Warrior Knights and those the very big games. They were
Sure.
the province of Paul Coburn. The other Steve Hand game was Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, which Paul
Of
worked
course.
with on that, which was a reskinning of a game called The Five Doctors in the Tomb of Rassilon. So
Okay.
it did square the circle with it, going into a tomb. It had the 3D cardboard pyramid with the walkways on it, which the
Yeah.
card game obviously didn't have, but there were definitely elements of that. And like a great game designer, no ideas are lost or wasted or forgotten. They come back. They come back time and time again. And in
Mm.
that case, that worked. I don't know if the game itself entirely worked,
Right.
but they had a good fist of it, and it looked great.
It did look great, yeah. And then that
That's what-
tower seemed to be reworked for a talisman expansion later on, right?
Very much so. It gave them the idea. And
Yeah.
we talk about the glory days of the studio and people just trying things. And that was definitely one of those. And the paper engineering and suddenly realizing what you could do.
Mm.
It wasn't just game design and a bit of graphic design. It was the paper engineering. Pete Tamlin, who will come up in a moment, and
Right.
myself worked on a Chainsaw Warrior video game for Areola Soft.
Right. Oh, yes. Okay.
And now we spent a glorious day in Manchester sampling chainsaws, cutting up different materials, because the Amiga, which is Areola Soft's prime thing, though it would go onto an early PC and probably a Spectrum or an Amstrad as well, had a proper sound chip in it, which is what I use for early drum and bass music and jungle and techno and things like that. So you could sample 16-bit sounds into it. So it was going to have real chainsaw sounds in it.
Right.
But it never came out. It didn't progress beyond us scripting elements of it, taking the board game apart, putting it together as levels and so on and so forth,
Right.
which was very easy because the game is a programmed thing already.
Sure.
But it would have been out before Doom.
Wow. Okay.
And again, another one of those things. But
I mean, why would stuff like that, or even like Chainsaw Warrior 2, why would they be cancelled? Would it literally just be, we don't think we've sold enough copies of the first one to warrant it? Or
the first, I think for the board game, that was exactly it.
Right.
They were moving increasingly into Warhammer. It was only really Talisman and Blood Bowl that continued after a certain time. They tried with the Chaos Model Orders and things like that, but they were a transitionary period. Because it takes a certain amount of time to make these things. You don't think of it Monday and it's published Friday. It can be a year, 18 months. And sometimes you're committed to it. Go on, then we'll have that one come in. I think some of the latter KO's Eternal Champion books were like that. The Rogue Trooper board games,
Right.
and so well, Hal's done it now, so we'd put it out. But the license is running out in a year, and we won't do more,
Right.
and so on and so forth. And none of them did as well as Warhammer was doing. For the video games, there's always a lot of games that just don't make it. I've not done a lot of video game work, but I've worked on 5 or 6, and none of them have come out.
Right. Wow.
Just contributing scripting and bylines for this or that. Pete had a good mate who ran one of the Olasoft studios, who he'd known from something else. A guy called George, I can't remember his surname. He was very smart, and had a couple of nice lunches where he and I dropped the same 70s pulp sci-fi references for a particular project. And he was like, right, you're on board with this. But things change, budgets get cut, people decide they're not going to. But they will have paid Workshop for the license. I couldn't say whether some of that money went to Steve. Who knows? We'd like to think so. But Steve himself, of course, went off with Jim Bambra. And I think I went to work for Microprose, who were doing sci-fi war games, when
Right.
everyone pretty much moved on at the same time. And then they went various ways. They worked on various things. Steve did some FF game books as well. But
Of course. Yeah.
and there were unpublished games as well. And obviously we were talking about Chainsaw Warrior 2, which didn't happen. But the legendary one, for those who actually did play it, was a game called Frankenstein by Mike Brunton and Graham Davis, which is rarely talked about. Mike always liked to say it had the subtitle of "No one professor will forget an arm torn out by the roots," which was a bit long to go on the front, but there's a quote from his favourite version of Frankenstein. We're all reading Ghastly Beyond Belief, the Terry Pratchett Neil Gaiman collection of pulp movie quotes at the time.
Right.
Which is more recommended reading to know where some of the...
I think Kim Newman may have been involved in that as well, right?
Sorry, it's Kim Newman and Neil Gaiman, not...
Right, sure, yeah.
It's Good Omens. I was peering to try and see where it is on the shelves. All my good stuff is opposite me here. There it is, next to the Sven Hassels, because it's Gaiman. But very hard to get hold of these days, which is a shame, and they've never redone it. But Frankenstein was a game that the boys just brought in one day and said, "Oh, we're going to play test this," and we're like, "Oh, okay. Oh, what have you two been up to?" Well, we've been in the pub or down Rock City, and you each play a Renwick type character or Igor type character going around trying to secure body parts from different parts of the town, and there's different amounts of supplies on them to get them back to your particular evil master scientist in the castle or the dungeon or under the cathedral or in the back room of the pub or whatever, and build a Frankenstein before anyone else. They weren't sure about the end game, whether the person who if you can get it going, you can then rampage through the town, or whether it should stop just as you finished this thing. But we played it with them a couple of times and thought, this is the best thing ever. And we laughed and laughed and laughed. And then they arranged a play test. Brian liked to play these things. So him, Richard Ellard, who was studio head, Alan Merritt, sort of head of the IP and long-serving fellow. Have you talked to Alan? I think, yeah.
I have, yes. Yeah.
Another recently retired chap. And neither Mike nor Graham could make it. So the guys took it away, came back on Monday morning, and the project was cancelled. What is this boring piece of crap? We didn't understand it. None of the rules made sense. And that's how I remember it. It may have been a little more slow burn and, we're not really sure and so on. But they never got another chance to demonstrate it. And there are games where when you're playing them, you put as much into it as is in the game and you have great fun. There's an earlier game called Superpower that GW did, which is a weird Risk type game, very much stymied by having microscopic pieces, because you needed 500 tanks and 500 oil wells and $500 and those sort of things. And when the guys demoed them, they were using the Risk pieces, like the little asterisk pieces from the 70s, 80s edition. But that would have been too expensive. But when we played it like nuclear war, like we were just slaughtering people and, take that, I've crippled your company, give me $1 billion, wahaha. And we added so much to it that we convinced ourselves it was an amazing, world-beating, fun game. And then when it came out, everyone was like, what is this weird political maneuvering Risk type game? And it didn't do particularly well. Yeah, it's another one of those forgotten bookcase type games from the period between GW London and Blood Bowl times and so on. But I think it's the same with the Frankenstein game. There have been more recently a couple of games on the Frankenstein theme where you're doing exactly that. I think the idea is sound, running around trying to get body parts and some of the jokes you can make with that. I was playing a game called Trepanation recently. It was out a couple of years ago, which is about going around a sinister town, having arrived in town with your sinister circus and trying to steal body parts from the living and the dead to for your own nefarious things. So the idea is sound, but it didn't work then, and I think it was a great shame. But if it didn't work, it didn't work. Not every game is, oh, I've had an idea, therefore we're making it. Far from it. The casualties along the way have to be, 10 to 1 or whatever, or if not more. But
it's kind of surprising that because White Dwarf would write about all of these games. So there's bits in the news pages about Frankenstein's coming and Chainsaw Warrior 2 is on the way and stuff like that.
So desperate for news items
Right.
that they publish snippets, and no one really worried about the fact that, oh, if it never comes out, because we say, oh, of course, we're working on it. And, oh, let's tell people now. And I think after a while, as they got more tightened up and more business-minded, perhaps, the period of wild experimentation went away. It had to calm down. But for a long time, there are all sorts of products in there, which is really useful now because you can track not just the progress of products that came out, but the things that never happened or took many years and changed into something else.
Yeah.
The endless waiting for the Realm of Chaos books. And,
Sure.
it's called this, it's called that, it's got this in it, it's got that in it. Here's an excerpt from it. Oh, that's now not in it. Oh, well.
Yeah.
And it's that piece of those news snippets are part of the big source of the archaeology of the times, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And then there's a period you get into the 90s in White Dwarf where there's just nothing. They clearly learn the lesson and don't talk about it at all.
Like they only print the press releases or whatever
Yes.
trade sales are about to offer to the trade accounts.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I always hate the way that people go, oh, Games Workshop changed into a catalogue. Do you not think to remember who the distributor of every game featured in White Dwarf was? Issue 1 had Metamorphosis Alpha. Who brought that into the country? Oh, yes, Games Workshop. It was always a catalogue. Yes, it had adverts for some other shops in it. And you had options. But it was always a vehicle for being enthusiastic and passionate about games and selling them to you.
Sure.
And I think those folks are generally dying off now. Surely 40 odd years later, they finally realised that.
I think there's still a lot of love for that, especially that period where it was, there were lots of different adventures for all the, you were getting amazing stuff for RuneQuest and D&D and Call of Cthulhu during that period. So I'm not surprised there's still love for it, but yeah.
I've only saved White Dwarf 1 to 100 in the boxes. I didn't keep the ones I got given free when making them later, but not really a minis guy. So
sure.
I did save the ones with the issue 0 Inferno and the short stories and things in, of course, because they applied part of my CV. But no, you're totally right. And again, and we were talking off air earlier about when you just buy everything. It was the first issue was I'm surprised there's any print on my issue 4, which is the first one I saw, and read it 20 times. Couldn't make head nor tail of this thing, but it sounded so interesting. I still haven't got a copy of the Valley of the Four Winds board game from back, which had a short story and a review that made it sound really good rather than the half-hearted chip pushing old-fashioned thing that it actually is, as I understand it. One day. It's the only one I'm missing. We'll get there.
The White Dwarf also included a few notes about the Warhammer comic that never came out.
Yes, indeed. So that was very much after my time, but one of the chaps who came in after me was a lovely fellow called Sean Masterson. And he was part of the team that was assembling stuff. I think they also had an editor appointed whose name escapes me now. But they very much wanted to do one. Blood Bowl had certainly shown that comic strip type stuff. We'd done the Dread game, and Caleb Dark was taking over nicely, and again proving that they could publish comic stuff with scripts and great artwork. And then you had to do the lettering and the reproduction, because the technical side of doing comics is as requires a certain skill set, just like doing the writing and handling the crazy artists and so on and so forth. And of course, paying for it. Comic book art is very expensive because some poor sod has to sit there for 2 or 3 days drawing that page.
Sure.
But they'd scared up enough artists in that style. And Pete Nifton, who'd come in to work on second edition Blood Bowl and a bit of Dark Future stuff, also lived next door in the flat next door to me in the centre of Nottingham, which didn't hurt at all. So boy, did we do a lot of plotting in the pub and at other times, some of which made it in, some of which didn't. But he was a great one for writing little things on stuff. And that's where things like cans of Bloodwiser suddenly turn up in the illustrations and then go into the game and so on and so forth. And they'll have come from some late night joke from somebody, normally himself, very creative guy. Pretty much retired these days again, as happens to all of us, but still in Nottingham. But I had left by that point, but because I'd done a lot of Blood Bowl, it was like, well, why don't you and Pete try a Blood Bowl strip? And indeed, as you know, because I've shared a few scanned pages of it with you, that there was a sample script for the first of a 6-parter, which was only a few pages to go into an anthology comic that the crew were working on. It was never beyond Pete, I think, sketching out a few panel shapes, which he'd done on his copy, which is the one that I've got a scan of, that he pulled out for a Blood Bowl reminiscing chat, a podcast thing a few years ago, which I'd forgotten all about. I wish I had forgotten about the comedy Chinese stroke Japanese samurai character, which is a little thick here to say the least.
Right.
I've changed that these days, but of the time. But it was a full start for Blood Bowl comics. Later on, Matt Forbeck particularly made that his own with Blood Bowl novels, which I commissioned from him, and comic strips and so on and so forth, along with the revival of the game through Fanatic and the Blood Bowl companions and things, which came out of the team associated with Black Library, the little renegades, late 90s. And of course, Blood Bowl New Edition is just out.
Sure.
With 2 new teams looking amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know if Jervis has seen a copy. He hasn't been involved, but the people who know it and love it really know it and really love it. It's been one of the delights. Every so often I get something turn up from one of the Blood Bowl fan teams, whether it's a participant's medal from a convention or a new set of rules or how we're running the Living League this year or the NF and all that stuff. Just so passionate. And that's, you can see why GW have done another edition, frankly.
Sure.
And unlike some of the things that folks work on, it is the definitive gridiron football game. It wasn't the first one, by about the third or so, but there's been many others, Dungeon Bowl and so on and so forth, more recently. But it hit that, so it's not surprising that had a capacity for a strip. There were other ones. Some of them were drawn up, or there were samples, because when Andy Jones, with my help, started plotting a Warhammer comic, because, in fact, when we started plotting Inferno, which was this anthology of stories and cutaways, and originally supposed to be a Blue Peter annual with photos of models and how to do it, and here's a day in the life of John Blanche or Mike Brunton or whoever it happened to be. Well, it wouldn't be Mike back in those days, but he'd gone by then. But those sort of things. So it's features and stories, just like a classic 50s, 60s, 70s Blue Peter annual that the likes of Rick Priestley would have had under the Christmas tree every year. Before Warhammer quickly turned into a non-gaming material thing, because quite rightly White Dwarf Tournament says, we struggle to get miniature content ourselves, so don't you start nicking it for your particularly if you're planning on it coming out every few months. You haven't got enough. So it became a story thing. And some of the panels that we showed off and some of the early strips were by people who'd been in the running to do stuff the first time around.
Right.
Because it was only a few years previous. And obviously we then learned fairly rapidly how to do comics, and helped by some very clever people who advised us very well. Some Nottingham folks like Jim Campbell, who's one of the leading lettering experts in comics, because comic strip lettering and putting the speech bubbles in has to follow certain rules. You start on the left, you flow down the panel and all those things. Logical when you know it, but not if you do it for the first time without thinking about it as a young editorial assistant, as I did the first time. But you learn from the best. And a lot of 2000 AD and Tooth adjacent folks. And then ultimately your Dan Abnett's and so on, Gordon Rennies came in as writers and had a talent for fiction as well. And off it went. So although the original comic was a bit ill-fated,
Yeah.
I'm sure if there are folks closer to it than me, will know whether there were mock-ups or finished strips, and yeah, what the contents would be.
Sure.
But for me, it broke the ground on it that then later we were able to build on. Same with the fiction, really. Yeah, and the first thing we did when we set up Black Library was talk to the people who'd been published by Dave Pringle in the GW Books line. And Darling Ian Watson and crew said, yes, of course, I'll do you something else. Barrington Bailey, bless him, mad old eccentric. We had to send him a computer to work on. So we had literally packaged up an Apple Mac out of the office and say, right, type on that and then press Apple S and then send it back to us. He literally did that, bless him. Other folks, yeah, had been close to it, Bill King, and yes, where he came in from. But glory days, but in the level of, layer of archaeological strata, I think, back in the day. But nothing's wasted. It all feeds in, just like we're saying about Frankenstein and some of the other games.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, fascinating period of GW history. And I'm, like I say, so grateful for White Dwarf revealing things it maybe shouldn't have been talking about, because there's so many leads to fascinating stories in there.
It wasn't the only one. If you read things like Different Worlds, their news pages and their gossip pages, Tadashi Ihara were writing those. It's one of the lead staffers there, and a very dynamic character back in the day, getting things moving for Chaosium. There's a lot of stuff talked about. Oh, we hear rumors of this. And so,
Sure.
it's 'cause Greg Stafford thought of something in the pub or in the, over waffles that morning, and it went in because you're hungry for this stuff.
Sure. Yeah, I just because I've been following that lead and going to different worlds and lots of different magazines as well. Last Province, I just picked up some Last Province and
Space Gamer, Fantasy
yeah,
Gamer,
Space Gamer, absolutely.
Aries, SPI's magazine, all these things you forget about back in the day.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. In the Adventurer,
Was it Space Gamer that ran Murphy's Rules, where they pointed out crap
oh, I'm
rules?
not sure. I'm
Drawn
not
by
sure I'm
John
familiar.
Kovalic, as a very young man. The Apples to Apples, and now
Right.
Dork Tower, and
Oh,
one
right.
of
Yes.
the
Yeah.
gods of Steve Jackson, all the Munchkin
Oh,
art.
okay.
One of
Yeah.
the great guys in gaming, a lovely, lovely fellow.
That does
And
sound familiar now that you mention it, but I can't
as
place it.
we were so proud and yet absolutely humbled when they pointed out that in Rick's Judge Dredd RPG rules, the average citizen was stronger than the average judge. Um, which Carl Sargent and I we were commissioned to do a second edition of the Dredd RPG. And why Carl? Because he was around and was really good at wrangling this stuff, and was cleverer than I was. And we got as far as doing a pitch and got some money, and then they decided, no, we'll just republish the first one with all the mistakes and
Oh, right.
some things in it, just banged it out again. But
Oh, okay. That's
so it goes.
interesting.
Yeah,
Well,
and you'd have been able to play perps in the new edition. The side judges weren't an add-on; they were part of it, and the average judge was stronger than the average citizen in the.
well, because Ian Marsh went over to Adventurer magazine and was
He
doing their
did,
sort of
yeah. Well,
gossip
he'd done a
column.
column in Imagine magazine as well,
Right. Okay. Yeah.
which was hobby gossip and stuff.
Sure.
Every
Yeah.
so often, an embarrassing photo of me looking particularly goth as well, which is, I don't mind.
And he mentioned in one issue that I came across recently that there was talk of a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay play-by-mail game at some point,
Interesting.
apparently.
Wouldn't surprise me. PBM was still a thing.
Right,
PBM's
yeah.
still a thing.
I
Isn't
think
that
so.
extraordinary?
Yeah.
And people still out there doing stuff. And a lot of
Yeah.
stuff goes on online, but there are, online magazines that still do your diplomacy orders and your on guard orders and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's
I
fascinating.
scored a mint copy of Avalon Hill's first edition of Diplomacy
Wow.
at the weekend for £3, unplayed.
Incredible.
Shrink wrap on the pieces. I will never play it, of course, but that's the curse, isn't it? Anyway,
I mean, well, because you
that's just
need,
me
what,
showing.
7 players, I think, to get the most out of it?
Yeah, the more the better. 6, I think it takes. It's that
Right,
one.
6, okay.
Just looks so nice, and a beautiful full-size map board, and all the pieces with little bombs and so on and so forth. Still
That's
in the
great.
shrink wrap. But, that's the one that breaks up family groups, isn't it? Diplomacy.
Oh, yes.
Never played it. I got bitten by trying to play Civilization once and leaving after 3 hours and realizing that I was screwed from the decisions I'd made in turns 1 and 2, and another 8 hours of this wasn't going to help me. But went off and probably played Blackfeet actually.
Well, I mean that's we've explored a lot of different aspects of GW board games and all sorts there. So thank you so much for that, Mark.
You're welcome. It all fits in. One day, if someone writes the history of DW, they're going to have to wade through all this crap.
Indeed.
I'll say mostly harmless.
Massive thanks to Mark for spending so much time chatting with me about all the different aspects of his career, but especially this, where we talked about just really interesting lost stuff. It was really terrific. Thank you, Mark, for joining me again. If you would like to hear more from Mark, you can do so by checking out on the channel my interviews with him about his work on fighting fantasy and his work on the Black Library. Both truly fascinating interviews. I think Mark is just, I could listen to him all day, and I basically did when we spoke last, because he's just such a terrific guest. So they are really worth your time if you're interested in just all different aspects of Games Workshop's history. And if you would like to support my work, you can do so by checking out patreon.com/Jordan Sorcery. There you will get early and exclusive access to interviews, research articles, and lots of other interesting stuff besides. Or if you want something a little bit more familiar to support me, you can buy my range of Gary Morley sculpted miniature familiars. I am really proud of these guys. You can check them out on eBay via the link in the description below, or by searching for the username Jordan Sorcery. I can't get enough of them. I think they're great. And if you buy the miniatures, you also get a free download for a print and play board game that you can use them in, Familiar Frenzy. It's been terrific fun, and I hope that you enjoy them. Thank you once again to Mark. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.